So everybody hears me? It's fine. Okay, hello again. You know, I want to tell just that when I heard about this project, about this topic, yeah, it was via internet, I acquainted it, and I was very happy because I thought, oh, that's a great topic, because, you know, my life, I'm originally from Georgia, and it was part of Soviet Union, and, you know, my life was in a country where smuggling was a major issue nearly, you know, because it was a kind of totalitarian country, and everywhere, on every level, every territory, there were restrictions, and that's why smuggling was also totalitarian on every level, and you know, every territory was smuggling. And so, you know, first 38 years I spent there in Georgia, and smuggling was my very reality. And I was myself involved with smuggling. I was doing many things, you know, translating and, you know, then, you know, printing and distributing literature and this and that, you know, like what was forbidden. And that's why it was interesting for me very much to participate. And I'm happy to be here now. And, you know, it was spoken here about that, you know, it was mentioned this question that about moral issue of smuggling. You know, for us, this question did not exist in Soviet Union because every smuggler was like kind of savior angel for us. You know, he was bringing us pleasure, he was bringing us knowledge, he was bringing, and that's why it was like no issue. You know, smuggler was a great guy, you know, just no issue of morality existing. That's why it was such an interesting situation that I thought it's better, you know, that I write something little bit about this situation than just to describe my project, which everybody can see afterwards, you know, when I will do this project. And I wrote some lines about this general situation. I tried to put in, you know, a certain structure, you know, what was happening there in Soviet Union at that time, and then make some conclusions and come to our, you know, times and how I see situation in general. So the paper calls Smugglers of the Moon. I want to reflect on a particular moment from the history of smuggling, a moment which created a painfully exotic cultural episode. Smuggling was an important phenomenon, dividing the population of Soviet Union in two parts: those who longed for an unknown future and those who felt content with future that was planned and predictable. We had a smuggling class with full-time occupation, and this class can be divided into three symbolic subgroups: smugglers of rebellion, smugglers of paradise, and smugglers of the moon. The smugglers of rebellion were smuggling dissident thought from Soviet Union to the West and vice versa, politically active and social sharp discourses in general from the West to the Soviet Union. It was a big, important and dangerous mission. The smugglers of a paradise were serving the extensive demands of people in the Soviet Union for material goods and for all sorts of examples of the aesthetic advances of contemporaneous Western culture. Such goods made people happier and prouder of their existence, and sometimes also snobbish too. But more importantly, this illegal trade of goods was making us aware about the natural flow of the genesis and order of things manifested in the West, the territory where appearances of new forms were not forced to represent a specific ideology. So these smugglers were sustaining a glittering celebration, natural and everlasting flow of newly and freshly born signifiers. But for me, the most interesting and important were the smugglers of the moon. And in this, I myself was heavily involved. We were dealing with immaterial values from the whole of the rest of the world, from the East as well as the West, and also from the past, because many forms and thoughts from the past were also banned under the Soviet regime and needed smuggling. The goods smuggled in this case were ontological in character. Psychological texts, philosophical texts, a variety of evidential forms of discourses of eroticism, sexual discourse was one part of it, and facts of creativity that were trying to go beyond of the boundary of ordinary human consciousness. In the Soviet Union, these kinds of reflective activities were called idealistic thought. In other words, everything that was other to the rational and pragmatic social communistic life that was built on clearly defined moral rights. Hence, the smugglers of the moon were smuggling two things: ontological touch, images of contemporary art, contemporary classical and pop music, pornography, etc., and also ontological research, texts, documentation of facts and events, everything that was other to Soviet cultural set. These acts of the smugglers of the moon together form a part of an interesting chain of ideas trafficking. In the West, creative people, the initial smugglers of the moon during the period of heroic modernism, were attempting to smuggle sparks from the forbidden territory of truth, and then from the West, facts and pieces of evidences of the sparks of insights were again smuggled, this time into Soviet territory. An interesting dynamic. Actually, Adorno calls modern artists of this heroic period, partisans, but I think smugglers much better suits this activity, what modernist artists were doing at that period. These three subgroups of smugglers in Soviet Union together created with the consciousness of Soviet citizens values that were sacral in nature, and agents of these values had a shining, vital and magic aura. Because smuggled goods were mainly emanating from the West was sacralized as a single intangible producer of what human beings need on every level: rebellion, paradise and the moon. But these times changed tremendously, and the extraordinary experimental island that was the Soviet Union disappeared. I became a Western artist and discovered that the initial smugglers of the moon, those members of Western society mentioned above who smuggled sparks of insights of truth, have also practically disappeared. And the art world is now left bereft of this great, of this great beard of human beings, the smugglers of the moon. How did it happen? At the beginning of the last quarter of 20th century, Western society became utterly disappointed with the results of communal attempts to break through boundaries, efforts that were aiming to build here on the earth peace and harmony. So the major theoretical basis of these activities, the varieties of grand narratives, became under great suspicion and finally were discredited. But the cultural world response on this fact of epochal change, this elimination of a metaphysical truth as a vertical orientation, was very particular. To put it mildly, instead of seeking a different truth, the search for truth was abandoned altogether. Under this misunderstanding, the cultural world became happier, busier, and more dynamic. Its power of dedication became happily connected with the world itself and with serving a better future. Art became involved with the worldly problems and began to dedicate most of its language power to problems such as political, economic, demographic, ethnic, feminist, environmental, and all kinds of discrimination issues, and so on and so forth. And these kinds of activities received more generous support from the state, enabling an immense number of projects all over the world, because these kinds of projects also improve and elevate the image of the state. With this support, the art world also became luckier, more travels, more fun, more interactions of all kinds, and more people involved. These new kinds of activities are more democratic and open to a wider number of participant artists. So the art world became less morose and more joyous and interactive. A more communal cultural life was established with better and friendlier interactions between artists and curators. And the power matrix between artists and curators were tangibly inverted. But what about smugglers, especially smugglers of the moon, smugglers of ontological insights, smugglers of the features of the face of the other, smugglers of no features, of nothingness, all nearly disappeared. If there is no need for alien products, no one with smuggler's gift has the opportunity to discover and identify this talent inside themselves. The smugglers of the moon disappeared in the same way as the central figure of Kafka's A Hungerer artist. These kind of skills are not longer in demand. Old expressions of historic smugglers, Barnett Newman, art is always about truth. Joseph Beuys, art is always about the main questions. That's it. Thank you.